The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people had looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. They built telescopes, they sent probes. They dreamed of the day when they would finally meet others like themselves among the stars. That day came on a Tuesday morning in Geneva. Ambassador Vetherani of the Siluri stood in the center of the United Nations Assembly Hall. She was tall, almost 3 meters, with scales that shifted between deep blue and silver as she moved. Her eyes were large and golden, and they held the weight of centuries. She was old, even by the standards of her long-lived species. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had welcomed over 200 species into the Galactic Concord. This, she thought, would be no different. Around her stood representatives from 12 other species. There was Korath, a massive creature that looked like a bear made of stone, representing the Vorn Collective. There was Minster Yiel, a being of pure light contained in a crystalline shell, speaking for the Luminari. There were others too, each stranger than the last, each representing millions of worlds and trillions of lives. They had come to welcome humanity to the stars. The humans sat in their seats, watching with a mix of wonder and caution. Secretary General Elena Vasquez sat at the front, her dark hair pulled back, her face calm and unreadable. She was 53 years old, a former diplomat who had spent her life negotiating between nations. Now she would negotiate between worlds. Vetherani spread her arms wide in a gesture of welcome. When she spoke, the translation devices carried her words to every ear in the room. "People of Earth," she said, her voice smooth and ancient. "For 12,000 years, the Galactic Concord has maintained peace among the stars. 347 species live together in harmony, sharing knowledge, sharing resources, sharing the dream of a united galaxy. Today we extend our hand to you." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "We have watched your species for some time. We have seen your struggles, your wars, your pain. We have also seen your creativity, your determination, your capacity for growth. You are young, but you have potential. And so the Concord offers you something that has been offered to every spacefaring species in galactic history." She gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the air. It showed a document, the text glowing in soft blue light. "The Treaty of Integration," Vetherani continued, "a standard agreement that has brought peace and prosperity to every species that has signed it. Under this treaty, humanity will become a provisional member of the Concord. You will have access to trade routes spanning the galaxy. You will receive technological assistance to advance your civilization by thousands of years. You will be protected by the combined military might of 347 species. No enemy will ever threaten your worlds again." Murmurs spread through the human delegates. This was more than they had ever hoped for. Technology beyond their dreams, protection from unknown threats, a place among the stars. But Elena Vasquez did not smile. She was reading the holographic text, her eyes moving slowly over each word. Vetherani noticed her attention. "Of course," so the ambassador said smoothly, "membership comes with certain responsibilities, certain traditions that have served us well for 12 millennia. She began to list them, her tone casual, as if these were small matters hardly worth mentioning. "First, all military vessels will be surrendered to Concord control. This ensures that no single species can threaten the peace. Your people will be protected by Concord peacekeeping forces, so there will be no need for your own military." Some of the human generals shifted in their seats. Admiral Chen Wei, commander of Earth's space fleet, leaned forward with a frown. "Second," Vetherani continued, "population growth will be regulated according to Concord standards. Resources in the galaxy are vast but not infinite. Sustainable growth ensures prosperity for all." More murmurs. The population control clause meant limiting human births to replacement levels only. No expansion, no growth. Third, resource allocation will be managed by Concord Economic Councils. This prevents waste and ensures fair distribution among all member species. This meant that human industry, human mining, human production would all be controlled by alien bureaucrats. Earth's economy would no longer belong to Earth. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, provisional members will accept guidance councils composed of senior species representatives. These councils will advise your governments on matters of policy, ensuring that your civilization develops in harmony with Concord values. Elena Vasquez looked up from the document. Advise? She asked, her voice quiet but clear. Or control? Vethrani's scales flickered slightly. Guidance, she repeated. Senior species have wisdom that younger species lack. The councils ensure that mistakes are avoided, that your people do not repeat the errors of the past. Whose past? Vasquez asked. Yours or ours? There was a moment of silence. The other alien delegates exchanged glances. This was unusual. New species usually asked about the benefits, not the restrictions. The past of all species, Vethrani said carefully. Every civilization goes through periods of violence and instability. The Concord helps young species move beyond these stages more quickly. It is a gift. Vasquez nodded slowly. She looked down at the document again, then at the faces of her fellow humans. Admiral Chen's jaw was tight. Finance Minister Okonkwo was shaking her head slightly. Even the younger delegates, the ones who had been excited moments ago, now looked uncertain. Ambassador, Vasquez said, how long does provisional membership last? Until the guidance councils determine that a species is ready for full membership. This varies. Some species advance quickly, others require more time. What is the average? Vethrani hesitated for just a moment. Approximately 800 standard years. A gasp went through the human delegates. 800 years. 40 generations of human beings living under alien oversight. 40 generations without military self-defense, without economic freedom, without true self-governance. And if we decline, Vasquez asked. Now the silence was total. Even the alien delegates seemed frozen. Karath's stone face cracked slightly, showing surprise. Minister Yiel's light pulsed in agitation. Vethrani recovered quickly. No species has ever declined, she said. The benefits of membership far outweigh any concerns. And the alternative, she paused, choosing her words carefully. The galaxy can be a dangerous place for a species alone. There are threats you cannot imagine. Without Concord protection, without access to Concord technology, survival would be difficult. That sounds like a threat, Admiral Chen said, breaking protocol to speak. It is a statement of fact, Vethrani replied coolly. The Concord has maintained peace for 12,000 years. We have done so by ensuring that all spacefaring species operate within a framework of mutual cooperation. Species that exist outside this framework create instability. They threaten the peace. And the Concord has ways of encouraging cooperation when it is not freely given. The meaning was clear. Join willingly or be forced to join. Vasquez stood slowly. She was not tall, especially compared to the towering aliens around her. But something in her presence made the room feel smaller, made the aliens seem less imposing. Ambassador Vethrani, she said, I thank you for your offer. I understand that you have traveled far to deliver it personally, and that this is a great honor by your standards. She looked around the room, at the human delegates who were watching her with a mixture of fear and hope, at the alien representatives who waited with the confidence of those who had never been refused. However, she continued, I must ask for time to consider. This is the most important decision in human history. It cannot be made in a single day. Vethrani nodded graciously. Of course, we anticipated this. We will remain in orbit around your moon for 30 standard days, This should be sufficient time for your people to review the terms and prepare for integration. Prepare for integration, Vasquez repeated, not decide whether to integrate. The decision, Secretary General, is already made. It was made 12,000 years ago when the first Concord Treaty was signed. Every spacefaring species joins the Concord. It is the natural order of things. You have 30 days to accept this truth. With that, the alien delegation departed. They walked out of the assembly hall with the calm confidence of those who had never been challenged. They returned to their ships and ascended back to orbit, leaving humanity alone with the weight of their choice. That night, Elena Vasquez did not sleep. She sat in her office, reading the Treaty of Integration again and again. She studied the histories of other species that had joined the Concord. She found records of military interventions against species that had resisted. She found evidence of cultures that had been slowly erased, languages that had died, traditions that had been labeled destabilizing and suppressed. She found the Concord's true face beneath its mask of benevolence. The next morning, she called an emergency session of the UN Space Council. The room was filled with the most powerful people on Earth: presidents, prime ministers, generals, scientists, industrialists. They had all seen the alien offer. They were all afraid. "We cannot fight them," the president of the European Federation said. "Their technology is thousands of years ahead of ours. Their fleet could destroy every human ship in hours." "We cannot surrender either," Admiral Chen countered. "You read the same documents I did. Once we disarm, we're at their mercy forever. 800 years of servitude if we're lucky." "There must be a middle ground," the Prime Minister of India suggested. "Perhaps we can negotiate better terms." Vasquez shook her head. They were very clear. The terms are non-negotiable. They've been using the same treaty for 12,000 years. They don't negotiate because they've never had to. "Then what do we do?" the American president asked. "Accept slavery or face destruction?" Vasquez stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over Geneva, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere up there, beyond that beautiful sky, an alien fleet waited to learn humanity's fate. "I've been thinking about that question all night," she said, "and I keep coming back to something from our own history. In 1940, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. Every logical analysis said they should surrender. They were outmatched, outgunned, and surrounded. But they didn't surrender. They fought. And eventually they won. With help, someone pointed out. They had allies." "Yes," Vasquez agreed. "They did. And so might we. The Concord has 347 species. Do you think all of them are happy? Do you think none of them remember what freedom felt like?" The room was silent, processing her words. "But first," she continued, "before we can find allies, before we can even think about resistance, we need to do something that no species in galactic history has ever done." She turned to face them, her eyes hard with determination. "We need to say no." The next 30 days were the busiest in human history. Officially, Earth was considering the Concord's offer. Unofficially, humanity was preparing for war. Ships were moved to defensive positions around Earth and the 42 colony worlds that the Concord didn't know about. Yes, 42. In the 60 years since humanity developed faster-than-light travel, they had been busy. They had found habitable worlds and colonized them quietly, telling no one, trusting no one. It was a secret they had kept even from themselves, with each colony knowing only of a few others. Now that secret would become their greatest weapon. Scientists worked around the clock, analyzing every piece of Concord technology they could scan, looking for weaknesses. Military strategists developed defense plans. Engineers fortified orbital stations and planetary shields. And Elena Vasquez prepared her speech. On the 30th day, she boarded a shuttle and flew up to the Siluri flagship. Ambassador Vetharani received her in the same conference room where they had first met, surrounded by the same delegation of alien representatives. "Secretary General," Vetharani said warmly, "I trust your people have made the wise decision." Vasquez smiled. It was not a warm smile. "We have made a decision," she said. "I am here to deliver it personally, as you delivered your offer to us." She looked around the room at the assembled aliens, creatures of stone and light, of scale and shell, of form she could not name. They watched her with the patient confidence of predators who had never known defeat. "On behalf of the United Nations of Earth and all human territories," Vasquez said, her voice clear and steady, "I thank you for your offer of membership in the Galactic Concord." She paused, and in that pause, the galaxy held its breath. "We decline." The silence that followed was absolute. Vetharani's golden eyes widened. Her scales shifted through colors that had no names in human language. Around her, the other delegates reacted with shock, confusion, and anger. I don't understand," Vetharani said finally. "Perhaps the translation—" "There is no translation error," Vasquez said calmly. "We decline. We will not surrender our military. We will not accept population controls. We will not submit our economy to alien management. And we will not allow foreign councils to govern our people." "This is unprecedented," Korath rumbled, his stone face cracking with emotion. "No species has ever—" "There is a first time for everything," Vasquez interrupted, "and humanity has always been good at firsts." She stepped forward, and somehow, despite her small stature, she seemed to fill the room. "We offer instead a different arrangement. Equal partnership. Mutual defense treaties between sovereign powers. Free trade without economic control. Cultural exchange without cultural erasure. Friendship without subjugation." Vetharani found her voice. "You cannot be serious. You are one species, one planet. You cannot stand against the Concord." "One planet?" Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. "Ambassador, I think you'll find that humanity has grown somewhat since you first started watching us." She activated her own holographic display. It showed a map of human space, not one planet, but 43. 43 stars surrounded by defensive networks, shipyards, and military installations. The aliens stared in disbelief. "You should also know," Vasquez continued, "that as of 6 hours ago, all human military forces have been moved to defensive positions. Our colonies have activated shelter protocols, and we have initiated something we call the Lighthouse Protocol." "What is that?" Vetharani demanded. Vasquez did not answer directly. "I suggest you return to your council and discuss our counteroffer. We are willing to talk for as long as necessary, but we will not surrender. Not now, not ever." She turned and walked toward the door. Before she reached it, Vetharani's voice stopped her. "You are making a terrible mistake," the ambassador said. "The Concord does not tolerate defiance. You will bring destruction upon your people." Vasquez looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes were sad but unafraid. "Perhaps," she said, "but I would rather face destruction on my feet than live 1,000 years on my knees." She left the ship without another word. Behind her, the alien delegates erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Concord did not know what to do. In her shuttle, flying back toward Earth, Elena Vasquez allowed herself a single moment of fear. What had she done? What would happen to her people? Then the moment passed, and determination filled her once again. Whatever came next, humanity would face it together, and they would face it standing. The Concord High Council had not met in emergency session for over 3,000 years. The last time had been during the Vorn Rebellion, when one of the elder species had tried to break away from Concord control. That rebellion had been crushed in 6 months. The Vorn had learned their lesson, and no species had challenged the Concord since, until now. The council chamber was a massive dome floating in the void between 3 ancient stars. It had been built in the early days of the Concord, when the founding species still remembered what war was like. The dome was made of transparent crystal that let the starlight pour in from every direction, a reminder that the Concord's reach extended everywhere. 12 seats circled the central platform. These were the elder seats, reserved for the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. The Siluri occupied 1 seat. So did the Vorn, the Luminari, the Crystalline Maketh, and 8 others whose names were ancient when most species were still learning to use fire. Today, all 12 seats were filled, and surrounding them, in tiered galleries that rose toward the crystal ceiling, sat representatives from the other 335 member species. They had come to hear what would be done about the human problem. Vethrani stood at the center of the chamber, her scales pale with stress. In all her centuries of service, she had never failed to integrate a new species. The humans had humiliated her, and she knew that many in this chamber blamed her for the situation. "The facts are simple," she said, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the dome. "The humans have rejected the standard integration treaty. They have proposed an alternative arrangement based on what they call equal partnership. They have refused all offers of guidance and have stated that they will resist any attempt at forced integration." A murmur ran through the chamber. The Maketh representative, a being that looked like a tree made of living diamond, leaned forward. "This is not possible," it said, its voice like breaking glass. "No species in recorded history has rejected integration. The humans must be mistaken about the terms. Send another delegation to explain more clearly." "With respect," Vethrani replied, "the humans understood perfectly. Their leader, a female called Vasquez, asked detailed questions about every clause. They know exactly what they are rejecting." "Then they are insane," the Maketh said. "An insane species must be treated as threats to galactic stability." "I agree," said Korath of the Vorn. His massive stone body shifted in his seat, grinding like mountains colliding. "The humans are dangerous. Their history is filled with violence. Even among their own kind, they have never stopped fighting. If we allow them to remain independent, they will eventually threaten us all." Vethrani wanted to argue, but she knew Korath was not entirely wrong. She had studied human history during the journey to Earth. It was a catalog of wars, genocides, and destruction that had shocked even her. Humans had killed billions of their own kind over disputes about resources, ideology, and even something called religion that seemed to involve disagreements about things no one could prove. A species that violent could not be allowed to roam free in the galaxy. But Minister Yale of the Luminari raised a different concern. "Before we discuss military action," the being of light said, "perhaps we should consider the information the humans revealed. Ambassador Vethrani, you mentioned that they showed you a map of human territories." "Yes," Vethrani said carefully, "the humans have apparently colonized 43 star systems without our knowledge." This caused a sensation in the chamber. 43 systems was a small number compared to the millions controlled by the Concord, but the fact that they existed at all was deeply troubling. The Concord's surveillance network was supposed to track every spacefaring species in the galaxy. How had the humans hidden so much from them? "This is a significant intelligence failure," Yale continued. "We believed the humans were confined to their home system. We were wrong. What else are we wrong about?" "It doesn't matter," Korath said impatiently. 43 systems, or one, the humans cannot stand against us. We have 800,000 warships. They have, what, a few hundred? A few thousand? We could crush them in days." "Could we?" asked a new voice. All heads turned toward the oldest seat in the chamber. There sat Grandmother Teth, last of the Cathari, a species so ancient that they had been old when the Concord was founded. She rarely spoke in council meetings. When she did, everyone listened. Grandmother Teth was small, barely a meter tall, and her body was wrapped in cloth that hid everything except her 4 eyes. Those eyes were older than stars, and they had seen things that no other living being remembered. "Could we?" she repeated. "You assume much, young Korath. You assume the humans are like other species we have integrated. You assume they will break when pressed. You assume they have nothing we have not seen before." "What else could they have?" Korath demanded. "They are barely a century into space travel. They are children compared to us." "Children can surprise you," Grandmother Teth said softly. "I remember the early days before the Concord. I remember what war was like when species truly fought. The humans remind me of those times. They have not forgotten how to fight. They have not had millennia of peace to soften them. They are hard and sharp and desperate." She paused, her ancient eyes moving across the chamber. "And desperate creatures are the most dangerous of all." The chamber fell silent. Even Korath seemed uncertain. Grandmother Teth had seen more than any of them. If she was worried, perhaps they should be worried too. But the moment passed. The Maketh representative spoke again, its crystal voice cutting through the silence. "With respect to the honored elder, fear cannot guide our policy. The Concord has maintained order for 12,000 years by responding firmly to any challenge. If we allow the humans to defy us without consequence, other species may be encouraged to do the same. The rebellion of one becomes the rebellion of many. We have seen this pattern before." Many heads nodded in agreement. The lesson of the Vorn rebellion was well known. Show weakness once, and you invite chaos. Korath stood, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. "I propose immediate military action. Send a peacekeeping fleet to human space, not to attack, but to demonstrate our strength. Show them what they face if they continue their defiance. In my experience, species become much more reasonable when they see 800 warships in their sky." "Seconded," the Maketh said. "I oppose this motion," Yiel said, but its voice was lost as other representatives called out their support. Vetharani watched the vote happen with a growing sense of unease. She had seen the human leader's eyes. She had seen something there that the rest of the council had not. Something that made her wonder if they were making a terrible mistake, but she was only one voice among many. The vote passed overwhelmingly. A fleet of 800 warships would be dispatched to human space immediately. The message was clear: join the Concord or face destruction. Meanwhile, on Earth, Elena Vasquez was preparing for exactly this response. She stood in the command center beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by screens showing ship positions, intelligence reports, and communication feeds from across human space. Admiral Chen Wei stood beside her, along with General Okafor of the Colonial Defense Forces and Dr. Sarah Kim, head of special projects. "They're coming," Chen said, pointing to a display showing Concord fleet movements. 800 ships, heavy cruiser class or larger. They'll arrive at our borders in approximately 6 days. Vasquez nodded. "That's faster than we expected." "They must be very confident." "They should be," Chen replied grimly. 800 ships against our total fleet of 312. And their ships are larger, more advanced, better armed. On paper, we don't stand a chance." "Good thing we're not fighting on paper," Vasquez said. She turned to Dr. Kim. "Status of the Lighthouse Protocol?" Kim pulled up a different display. It showed thousands of small dots scattered across a map of the galaxy. "Deployment is complete. 32,000 probes, positioned in systems throughout Concord space. Each one contains a complete archive of everything we've gathered about Concord history, including the parts they don't want anyone to remember. Vasquez smiled grimly. In the decades since humanity discovered faster-than-light travel, they had not only been colonizing systems, they had also been watching and learning. They had intercepted conquered communications, hacked into their networks, and pieced together the true history of the galaxy's rulers. It was not a pretty picture. The conquered spoke of peace and cooperation, but their peace was built on threats and coercion. Species that joined willingly were treated well enough, but those who resisted were crushed. Their populations were relocated, their cultures were erased, and their histories were rewritten to show that they had always been loyal members of the conquered. The galaxy had forgotten how to fight because the conquered had systematically destroyed anyone who remembered. The Lighthouse Protocol was humanity's insurance policy. If Earth fell, if every human colony was destroyed, the probes would activate. They would broadcast the truth to every species in the galaxy. Every lie the conquered had told, every atrocity they had committed, every freedom they had stolen, all of it would be revealed. It would not save humanity, but it might destroy the Concord. And that, Vasquez had decided, was better than surrendering. "What about the defense networks?" she asked, turning to General Okafor. The general was a tall woman with gray hair and a calm demeanor that never seemed to crack, even under pressure. She had commanded colonial defense forces for 20 years and had faced everything from pirate raids to asteroid strikes. "All stations are at full readiness," she reported. "The Kepler line is fully operational. Autonomous weapons platforms, stealth minefields, and gravity distortion generators. Anyone who tries to push through will pay dearly." "Will it be enough?" Vasquez asked. Okafor hesitated. "It will hurt them," she said finally. "Maybe badly, but 800 ships is a lot. If they're willing to take the losses, they'll eventually break through." "Then we need to make sure those losses are unacceptable," Vasquez said. She turned to face the entire room. Around her, hundreds of officers and specialists were working at their stations, managing the most complex military operation in human history. They were afraid. She could see it in their faces. But they were also determined. "Everyone," she said, raising her voice so all could hear. "In 6 days, the Concorde will arrive at our borders. They expect us to break. They expect us to beg for mercy. They expect us to be like every other species they've conquered." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "They are wrong." She walked among the stations, looking into faces as she passed. "We are humanity. We have survived ice ages and plagues. We have survived world wars and nuclear standoffs. We have survived ourselves, which may be the hardest test of all. And we have done it not by surrendering, not by kneeling, but by standing up and fighting for what we believe in." She stopped at the central display, which showed the incoming Concorde fleet as a cloud of red dots moving toward human space. "The Concorde thinks they know us. They've read our history. They've seen our wars. They think that makes us weak, that our violence is a disease that they need to cure. But they don't understand what our history really means." She turned to face the room again, her eyes burning with conviction. "It means we know how to fight. It means we've been practicing for 10,000 years. It means that when our backs are against the wall, when everything is at stake, when there is no retreat and no surrender, that is when humanity is at its most dangerous." A murmur ran through the room. She saw backs straightening, fear giving way to determination. "We may not win this battle," Vasquez continued. "We may not survive this war. But I promise you this. We will make them remember us. 1,000 years from now, when species across the galaxy tell stories about the day someone finally stood up to the Concorde, they will tell stories about us, about humanity, about the people who said no." She raised her fist. "For Earth, for our colonies, for the future we choose to build." The room erupted. Fists rose throughout the command center. Voices shouted in response. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something stronger. pride, defiance, the fierce determination of people who had decided to fight, whatever the cost. Admiral Chen stepped to her side, his voice low. "That was a good speech." "It was the truth," Vasquez replied. "Now let's make sure we live up to it." Over the next 6 days, humanity prepared. Ships took up positions along the Kepler line, the string of systems that formed the outer boundary of human space. These were not the newest or largest ships. Those were held in reserve, hidden in systems the Concorde didn't know about. The ships on the Kepler line were older vessels, crewed by volunteers who knew they were probably facing a one-way mission. They went anyway. Defense platforms were activated, their automated systems coming online for the first time since they were built. Minefields were armed. Gravity generators were charged, ready to create distortions that would tear enemy ships apart. And across human space, people watched and waited. On Earth, families gathered together. Some prayed, some said goodbye. Many refused to believe that it would really come to war. The Concorde was supposed to be about peace after all. Surely they wouldn't actually attack. On the colony worlds, people were more practical. They had chosen to live on the frontier, knowing the risks. They checked their shelter assignments, tested their emergency systems, and prepared for the worst. In the shipyards of Kepler 442b, the largest human colony, workers labored around the clock to finish the newest warships. These ships were different from anything the Concorde had seen before. They were built for one purpose: killing other spacecraft. Every system, every design choice, every piece of equipment was optimized for combat. They were ugly, brutal, and terrifying. They were humanity's answer to the Concorde's question. On the 6th day, the Concorde fleet arrived. 800 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space. They were beautiful in a terrible way, each one a work of art thousands of years in the making. Their hulls gleamed with exotic alloys. Their weapon systems hummed with barely contained energy. They were the finest military vessels in the galaxy, crewed by species that had been at peace so long they had forgotten what real war looked like. The fleet commander was High Admiral Thesson of the Vorn, Korath's nephew. He was young for his kind, only 800 years old and eager to prove himself. This mission was supposed to be simple: show up, demonstrate overwhelming force, and watch the humans surrender. He opened a communication channel to the human forces. "People of Earth," he said, his voice booming across space, "I am High Admiral Thesson of the Galactic Concorde Peacekeeping Fleet. You have one standard day to accept the integration treaty and stand down your military forces. If you do not, we will be forced to take action to restore order. The choice is yours." He closed the channel and settled back to wait. This was how it always went: a show of force, a period of negotiation, and then surrender. The humans might be stubborn, but they weren't stupid. No one could look at 800 warships and choose to fight. The response came not from Earth, but from a small station on the Kepler line. The signal was broadcast on every frequency, in every language, to every ship in both fleets. It was Secretary General Vasquez. "High Admiral Thesson," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Thank you for your offer. We decline." Thesson's stone face cracked with surprise. "Furthermore," Vasquez continued, "we have a message for you, for your fleet, and for the species of the galaxy watching this confrontation." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was hard as steel. "We did not ask for this. We did not seek out the Concorde. We did not threaten anyone. We simply wanted to live our own lives, in our own way, among the stars. You came to us, demanded our submission, and threatened us with destruction if we refused." She leaned forward, her eyes burning into the camera. "Very well, we refuse. And now you will learn what happens when you threaten humanity." She straightened, her voice rising. We will defend ourselves. We will fight with everything we have. And if we fall, we will not fall quietly. Watch and remember. This is humanity's answer to tyranny. The transmission ended. Dasan stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Around him, his officers exchanged uncertain glances. This was not how it was supposed to go. New species always surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. That was the natural order of things. But the humans were not natural. They never had been. And as Thesson gave the order to advance, he felt something he had never experienced before, something that his species had not felt in thousands of years. Fear. High Admiral Thesson gave the order to advance, and 800 warships of the Galactic Concord began their push toward human space. It was supposed to be a simple operation. The humans had no more than a few hundred ships, primitive vessels barely a century old. The Concord fleet had weapons that could crack planets, shields that could withstand supernova blasts, and technology refined over 12,000 years of peace. The outcome was obvious to everyone except the humans. The first surprise came at the edge of the Kepler line. Thesson's forward scouts, fast ships designed for reconnaissance, entered the system known to humans as Kepler 138. It was an unremarkable red dwarf with a handful of rocky planets, chosen by humanity as the first line of their defense. The scouts expected to find perhaps a few defensive platforms, maybe some old ships left as a token resistance. Instead, they found nothing. Empty space, silent planets, not a single human vessel in sight. "They've retreated," Thessan's tactical officer said with relief. "The humans are smarter than we thought. They know they cannot win." Thessan was not so sure. Something felt wrong. The humans had been so defiant in their messages. Why would they simply run? "Continue the advance," he ordered, "but carefully." The main fleet entered Kepler 138, spreading out in standard formation. 800 ships, arranged in perfect geometric patterns that had been developed over millennia. It was a beautiful sight, a demonstration of overwhelming power that had broken the will of dozens of species. And then the stars themselves seemed to turn against them. It started with small distortions in space, barely visible ripples in the fabric of reality. The Concorde navigators noticed them first, flagging them as anomalies in their sensor readings. Before they could report their findings, the distortions became something much worse. Gravity generators hidden in the asteroid fields and buried on the surface of dead moons activated simultaneously. Space itself twisted and warped, creating invisible walls of force that tore through the Concorde formation. Ships that had been flying in perfect order suddenly found themselves pulled in different directions. Hulls designed to withstand incredible forces groaned and buckled under gravitational stresses they were never meant to face. 12 ships were destroyed in the first 30 seconds. Not by weapons, not by enemies, but by space itself turning hostile. "Evasive action," Thesson roared. "Break formation. Get clear of the distortions." The fleet scattered, discipline breaking as ships fought to escape the gravity traps. And that was when the second surprise revealed itself. From the dark spaces between asteroids, from the shadows of small moons, from places where no sensors had detected anything at all, human ships appeared. They were small compared to the Concorde vessels, ugly things without the graceful lines of advanced technology. They looked like weapons welded onto engines, primitive and brutal. They were also incredibly fast. The human ships did not engage in traditional space combat. They did not form lines and exchange fire from long range, as Concorde doctrine demanded. Instead, they attacked in swarms, dozens of small vessels overwhelming individual Concorde ships before moving on to the next target. Their weapons were strange and terrible. They fired projectiles instead of energy beams, solid masses of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. Concorde shields designed to deflect energy attacks struggled against the raw physical force. Some shots punched straight through, tearing holes in hulls that had never been breached before. "What is this?" Thesson demanded, watching his display fill with damage reports. "What kind of weapons are these?" His science officer studied the readings with growing horror. "They're using kinetic impactors," he reported. "Solid projectiles. Our shields aren't calibrated for this type of attack. The humans have developed weapons specifically designed to counter our defenses." Thesson stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. The Conquered had been fighting, if you could call it fighting, with energy weapons for 10,000 years. No one used kinetic weapons anymore. They were primitive, inefficient, outdated. But against shields designed to stop energy, they were devastating. The battle raged for hours. The Conquered fleet had numbers and firepower on their side, and they began to adapt. Ships reconfigured their shields, adjusted their tactics, and slowly began to push back against the human swarms. But every advance cost them. For each human ship destroyed, 2 or 3 Concorde vessels were damaged or crippled. The humans fought with a ferocity that shocked the Concorde crews. They did not retreat when outmatched. They did not surrender when their ships were dying. They fought until their weapons were empty and their engines were burning. And then they turned their crippled vessels into weapons themselves, ramming Concorde ships in final acts of defiance. And they were not alone. The autonomous weapons platforms activated throughout the system, unleashing volleys of missiles that tracked Concorde ships with relentless precision. Stealth mines drifted through the battle space, detonating when enemy vessels came too close. The entire system had been turned into a trap, and the Concorde fleet was caught in its teeth. After 6 hours of continuous combat, Thesson ordered a withdrawal. The numbers told the story. The Concorde had entered Kepler 138 with 800 ships. They left with 573. Over 200 vessels destroyed or too damaged to continue. Tens of thousands of crew members dead. It was the worst military defeat in Conquered history. And the humans had only lost 64 ships. The news reached the Concorde High Council before Thesson's official report. Faster-than-light communications carried rumors, fragmentary reports, and panicked messages from survivors. By the time the council convened, the entire galaxy knew that something extraordinary had happened. Vethrani sat in her seat, watching the chaos unfold around her. The chamber was in an uproar. Species that had been calm and confident just days ago were now shouting accusations and demanding explanations. How could this happen? Who was responsible? What did it mean for the Concorde itself? Korath was on his feet, his stone face cracked with rage. "This is an outrage," he bellowed. "The humans have attacked us. They have killed our people. This is an act of war." "We attacked them," Minister Yield pointed out, its light pulsing with agitation. "Our fleet entered their space. We fired the first shots." "At the orders of this council," Korath thundered. "The humans were supposed to surrender. They were supposed to be afraid. Instead, they—" He stopped, unable to find words for what had happened. "They fought back," Grandmother Teth said quietly. Her voice carried across the chaos, and slowly the chamber fell silent. "They did exactly what they said they would do. We should not be surprised." "How were we supposed to know they could do this?" the Maketh representative demanded. "Our intelligence said they had primitive technology, a small fleet, no experience with real warfare. Instead, we find hidden colonies, advanced weapons, defensive networks we never detected. How did we miss so much?" Vethrani stood slowly. She'd been dreading this moment, but she knew it had to come. "We missed it," she said, her voice heavy with shame, "because we stopped looking. We stopped taking other species seriously. We assumed that because we had been powerful for 12,000 years, we would always be powerful. We assumed that because no one had challenged us, no one ever could." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings she had known for centuries. The humans did not make these assumptions. They looked at us and saw a threat. They prepared for that threat in secret, while we watched them with the lazy confidence of old predators who have forgotten what it means to hunt. We thought they were children. We were wrong. "What are you suggesting?" Korath demanded. "That we surrender? That we let these humans dictate terms to the Concord?" "I am suggesting," Vethrani said carefully, "that we consider the possibility that we have made a serious mistake, and that if we continue on this path, we may make things much worse." "We cannot show weakness," the Maketh shouted. "If we retreat now, every species in the galaxy will see it. They will know the Concord can be defeated. They will know resistance is possible. The order we have maintained for 12 millennia will collapse." "Perhaps," Grandmother Teth said, "that order was not as stable as we believed." All eyes turned to her. The ancient being seemed smaller than ever, wrapped in her dark cloth, but her 4 eyes burned with a light that was older than most civilizations. "Do you know why the humans were able to do this?" she asked. "It is not because they are stronger than us, or smarter, or more advanced. It is because they have something we lost long ago. They have will. They have the determination to fight for what they believe in, even when they cannot win. We took that from ourselves when we built the Concord." She stood slowly, her small body straightening. 12,000 years ago, we were warriors, all of us. We fought wars that burned across the galaxy, wars that destroyed worlds and killed trillions. It was terrible. So we built the Concord to end the fighting, to ensure that such horrors would never happen again. And in doing so, we forgot how to be warriors. She looked at Korath, at the Maketh, at all the representatives who had voted for military action. "The humans have not forgotten. They are what we used to be. And now we must decide, do we continue this war, spending lives and resources to crush a species that will never stop fighting? Or do we admit that we have met something we do not know how to defeat?" The chamber erupted again. Arguments flew back and forth, accusations and counter-accusations filling the air. But Vethrani noticed something that she had never seen before in a Concord Council meeting. Fear. It was in the way representatives looked at each other, in the hesitation before they spoke, in the way some refused to meet the eyes of their neighbors. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Concord was afraid, and that fear would change everything. On Earth, Secretary General Vasquez watched the reports from Kepler 138 with grim satisfaction. They had won the first battle, but she knew this was only the beginning. "Casualties?" she asked, turning to Admiral Chen. 64 ships lost, he reported. Approximately 1,800 crew members killed, another 32 ships damaged and currently undergoing repairs. Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment. 1,800 names. 1,800 families who would receive the worst news of their lives. She had known this was coming, had prepared herself for it, but the weight of those deaths still pressed down on her. "And the Concord?" she asked. "At least 200 ships destroyed or crippled. Casualty estimates are in the tens of thousands, possibly higher. They've retreated to the edge of the system to regroup." "They'll come back," General Okafor said. She had dark circles under her eyes from days without sleep, but her voice was steady. "This was just the first wave. The Concord has hundreds of thousands of ships. They can absorb losses that would destroy us." "I know," Vasquez said, "which is why we need to make sure this isn't just a military victory. We need to make it mean something." She turned to Dr. Kim. "The Lighthouse probes, are they still secure?" "All 32,000 probes are active and monitoring," Kim confirmed. "We haven't triggered the broadcast yet, but we could do so at any time. The Concord knows they're out there. They've been trying to find them, but we designed them to be almost impossible to detect." "Good. Let them worry about what we might reveal." Vasquez pulled up a different display, showing communications intercepts from across the galaxy. What are we seeing from other species? Kim scrolled through the data. Increased chatter, a lot of it. Species that have been quiet for centuries are suddenly talking to each other. Some of it is encrypted, but what we can read suggests shock, disbelief, and something else. What? Hope, Kim said quietly. Some of them are starting to hope. Vasquez nodded slowly. This was what she had counted on. The Concorde had maintained control for so long, not just through force, but through the belief that resistance was impossible. By fighting back, by winning even one battle, humanity had broken that belief. We need to reach out to them, she said, carefully, secretly. Find the species that remember what freedom was like. Find the ones who might be willing to stand with us. That's risky, Chen warned. If the Concorde finds out we're trying to build an alliance against them, they'll escalate immediately. No more peacekeeping fleets. Full military mobilization. They're going to escalate anyway, Vasquez replied. We hurt their pride. They can't let that stand. The question is whether we face them alone or with allies. She looked out the window of the command center, up at the stars that were now both humanity's home and its battlefield. The Concorde has spent 12,000 years teaching species to be obedient, she said. They've forgotten that obedience can be unlearned. Every species in that galaxy was once free. They can be free again. All they need is someone to remind them that it's possible. She turned back to her team. So let's remind them. Over the following weeks, humanity began its most audacious project yet. Using the network of hidden probes and covert communication channels they had built over decades, human diplomats began making contact with species throughout the galaxy. They started with the obvious targets, species that had been recently integrated, whose people still remembered life before the Conquered. They found resentment, bitterness, and a burning desire for the freedom that had been taken from them. They moved on to older members, species that had been part of the Conquered for centuries or millennia. Here the work was harder. Many had forgotten what independence meant. But even among these ancient peoples, there were those who remembered. There were historians who had preserved the old stories, rebels who had never stopped dreaming, and leaders who had grown tired of bowing to alien guidance councils. And everywhere they went, the humans found the same question. Can you really win? The answer Vasquez gave was always the same. We don't know if we can win, she would say, but we know we will fight. We know that the Concorde is not as strong as it pretends to be. And we know that if enough species stand together, if enough peoples remember what they once were, then even the Concorde cannot stand against us. It was not a promise of victory, but it was something almost as valuable. It was hope. Meanwhile, the Concorde was preparing its response to the disaster at Kepler 138. The High Council had debated for weeks, but in the end, pride and fear won out over caution. They would not negotiate with the humans. They would not accept anything less than complete submission. The humans had humiliated them, and that humiliation had to be answered. A new fleet was being assembled, larger than the first. 2,000 warships this time, along with ground forces for planetary occupation. The goal was not just to defeat humanity, but to destroy them so completely that no species would ever dare to resist again. They would make an example of Earth. But as the fleet gathered, as the mighty warships of a dozen species prepared to erase humanity from the stars, something was happening that the Concorde had not anticipated. Species were watching, species were talking, and species were starting to remember. On 17 worlds scattered across the galaxy, resistance movements that had been dormant for centuries began to stir. Leaders who had accepted Concorde rule for generations began asking questions they had never dared ask before. Populations that had been peaceful and compliant began to grow restless. The galaxy was changing. And at the center of that change was a small species from an unremarkable planet, a species that had looked at the greatest power in the universe and said no. Humanity had no idea if they would survive the coming battle, but they had already done something that no one else had accomplished in 12,000 years. They had made the Concorde afraid, and fear, once planted, has a way of growing. The Second Concorde Fleet was the largest military force assembled in over 3,000 years. 2,000 warships from 28 different species, commanded by Grand Admiral Vorath, the most decorated military leader in living memory. He had put down rebellions on 17 worlds, negotiated the surrender of 3 spacefaring civilizations, and served the Concorde for over 2,000 years. He was old, experienced, and absolutely certain of victory. The fleet gathered at Concorde Station Prime, a massive structure that hung in the void between 3 star systems. Ships arrived from across the galaxy, the crystalline vessels of the Makath, the living ships of the Veldari, the fortress ships of the Vorn, and dozens of others. Together they represented the full might of galactic civilization. Vorath stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Peace, and watched his fleet take shape. 2,000 ships, 100 million crew members, weapons powerful enough to sterilize entire planets. Against them stood a species that had only been in space for 60 years. "This will be over quickly," his aide said, a young Siluri named Tassari, who had been assigned to him after the disaster at Kepler 138. "The humans cannot stand against such force." Vorath did not respond immediately. He was studying the reports from the first battle, analyzing every detail of the human tactics. What he saw troubled him. "They fought well," he said finally. "Better than any species I have seen in centuries. They prepared specifically for our weapons, our shields, our formations. They did not just resist, they adapted." "They were lucky," Thessari insisted. "Admiral Thesson underestimated them. You will not make the same mistake." "No," Vorath agreed. "I will not." He turned away from the window and walked to the tactical display. The map showed human space, 43 known systems, with Earth at the center. Intelligence suggested there might be additional hidden colonies, but their locations remained unknown. "We will not repeat Thesson's approach," Vorath announced. "No single thrust, no assumption of easy victory. We will advance on multiple fronts simultaneously, overwhelming their defenses through sheer numbers. They cannot be everywhere at once." He began marking targets on the display. "Fleet Group 1 will strike at the Kepler colonies. Fleet Group 2 will advance toward their industrial centers. Fleet Group 3 will make directly for Earth. Each group will be strong enough to handle any resistance, but small enough to maneuver. The humans will be forced to divide their forces, and we will destroy them piece by piece." It was a sound strategy. Against any normal enemy, it would have been overwhelming. But the humans were not normal. Secretary General Vasquez received the intelligence report on the Second Fleet's composition and felt her heart sink. 2,000 ships. She had known this was coming, but the reality was still staggering. "We can't stop that many," Admiral Chen said quietly. They were alone in her office, the doors sealed, and all recording devices disabled. Some conversations were too important for official records. "Even if we pulled every ship from every colony, even if we activated every reserve, we'd still be outnumbered 4-1, and their ships are still better than ours." "I know," Vasquez said, "which is why we're not going to try to stop them." Chen stared at her. "What do you mean? We have to defend." "We have to survive," Vasquez interrupted. "That's our only real objective, survival. As long as humanity exists, we have a chance. As long as one colony remains free, the Concorde has not won." She pulled up a display showing human space. "We're going to evacuate the outer colonies. Everyone who can be moved will be transported to our hidden systems, the ones the Concorde doesn't know about. We'll leave skeleton crews behind to maintain the appearance of normal operations. But our real strength will be elsewhere. You're talking about abandoning worlds, billions of people. I'm talking about saving them. The Concord doesn't want to destroy us. They want to integrate us. If our people are on worlds they can't find, they can't integrate them. Vasquez met his eyes. This is going to be ugly, Admiral. We're going to lose battles. We're going to lose ships. We might lose Earth itself. But as long as humanity survives somewhere, we haven't lost the war. Chen was silent for a long moment. The people won't like it. Running away. It goes against everything we've been telling them. Then we'll tell them the truth, Vasquez said. We'll tell them that this is a tactical retreat, not a surrender. We'll tell them that we're fighting a different kind of war. A war of survival, not conquest. And we'll tell them that when the time is right, we'll take back everything we've lost. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. There's something else, something I haven't shared with the full council yet. What? The diplomatic outreach has been more successful than we hoped. 17 species have made contact with us in secret. 12 of them have agreed to provide covert support, intelligence, supplies, safe harbor for our refugees. And 3 of them, she paused, choosing her words carefully, 3 of them are considering open rebellion. Chen's eyes widened. Against the Concord? Against the Concord. Not immediately, not while the war is still in doubt. But if we can survive long enough, if we can prove that resistance is possible, they're willing to stand with us. For the first time since he had seen the intelligence report, Chen felt a spark of hope. We're not fighting alone, he said. We're not fighting alone, Vasquez agreed. We just have to survive long enough for that to matter. The second Concord fleet attacked 3 weeks later. As Vorath had planned, they came from multiple directions simultaneously. Fleet Group 1 pushed into the Kepler systems. Fleet Group 2 struck at human industrial centers. Fleet Group 3 made for Earth. The humans did not try to hold the line this time. Their ships engaged in hit-and-run attacks, harassing the conquered forces and then retreating before they could be trapped. Defense platforms activated, slowing the advance but did not attempt to stop it entirely. Vorath was pleased at first. The humans were learning their place. They were running as they should have from the beginning. But as his forces advanced, he began to notice something strange. The colonies they captured were empty, not abandoned in panic, with possessions left behind and chaos in the streets. Empty as if no one had ever lived there. Buildings stood intact but hollow. Factories hummed along on automatic, but no workers tended them. Farms grew crops that no one would harvest. Billions of people had simply vanished. Where did they go? Thesari asked, standing beside Vorath on an empty street on Kepler 442b. The planet had been humanity's largest colony, home to over 2 billion people. Now it was a ghost world. I don't know, Vorath admitted. Our intelligence showed normal population levels until days before we arrived. They couldn't have evacuated that many people so quickly. It's impossible. Unless they had somewhere to take them that we don't know about. Vorath's scales darkened with anger. The humans were hiding from him, running to secret holes where his fleet could not follow. This was not the honorable defeat he had expected. This was something else entirely. Find them, he ordered. I want every scout ship we have searching the surrounding systems. The humans have hidden colonies. We need to find them and end this. But the hidden colonies were well hidden indeed. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this day, choosing worlds that were unremarkable, difficult to scan, and far from normal trade routes. The Concord scouts searched for weeks and found nothing. Meanwhile, the human raiders continued their attacks. They struck at supply convoys, picking off transport ships before vanishing into the void. They ambushed patrol vessels, destroying them and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. They planted bombs in captured facilities. timing them to explode just as conquered troops moved in. It was not the kind of war the conquered was prepared for. Their doctrine was built on decisive battles, overwhelming force, and swift victory. The humans refused to give them any of these things. And on Fleet Group 3's advance toward Earth, something happened that changed everything. The Concorde forces reached Earth's outer solar system expecting heavy resistance. Instead, they found an invitation. A single human ship, unarmed and broadcasting on all frequencies, waited for them at the orbit of Neptune. Its pilot identified herself as Commander Sarah Chen, Admiral Chen's daughter. She carried a message from Secretary General Vasquez. "Humanity requests a meeting," she announced. "One representative from each side at a neutral location. We wish to discuss terms." Varath was suspicious, but the High Council was eager. After weeks of chasing shadows, a chance to negotiate seemed like a blessing. They agreed to the meeting. It was held on humanity's diplomatic station, the one Vasquez had spoken from after the Battle of Kepler 138. Vorath came himself, bringing an honor guard of 30 warriors. The humans welcomed them with courtesy and led them to a conference room with a view of the stars. Vasquez was waiting for them. She looked tired. The war had aged her, leaving new lines on her face and gray in her hair. But her eyes were still sharp, and her voice was still strong. "Grand Admiral," she said, rising to greet him, "thank you for coming." "I came to accept your surrender," Vorath replied bluntly. "Your situation is hopeless. Your colonies have fallen. Your fleet is in hiding. Earth lies before us undefended. End this foolishness now, and the Concorde may yet be merciful." Vasquez smiled. It was not a happy smile. "I didn't ask you here to surrender," she said. "I asked you here to give you a chance to." Vorath's honor guard tensed. Several reached for weapons, but Vasquez made no threatening moves. "Let me tell you what's going to happen," she continued. "In approximately 1 hour, 3 things will occur simultaneously. First, our hidden fleets will emerge from where they have been waiting and launch coordinated attacks on your supply lines. You'll lose half your logistics capacity before you even know what's happening." Vorath laughed. "You expect me to believe?" "Second," Vasquez continued as if he hadn't spoken, "the species of the Cathari Reach will announce their withdrawal from the Conquered. They will be joined by the Veldari Consortium in the Outer Systems Alliance. That's 37 species representing over 400 star systems, declaring independence in a single day." Now Vorath stopped laughing. The Cathari Reach was one of the oldest members of the Conquered. If they withdrew, third, Vasquez said, her voice dropping, "we will activate the Lighthouse Protocol." "The probes," Vorath breathed. "The truth you've gathered. The truth the Concorde has hidden for 12,000 years. Every species in the galaxy will learn what really happened to those who resisted integration. Every species will see the evidence of cultural erasure, forced relocations, and quiet extinctions that the Concorde has pretended never happened. The lie you've built your empire on will be exposed." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "Grand Admiral, I'm not asking you to surrender because we've beaten you militarily. You could probably still destroy us if you were willing to pay the price. I'm asking you to surrender because your empire is already falling apart. The species you've controlled for millennia are waking up. They're remembering what freedom means, and nothing you do to us will change that." Vorath stood in silence for a long moment. His mind raced through possibilities, looking for a way out, a way to salvage the situation. But everywhere he looked, he saw only disaster. If he attacked now, the rebellion would spread. If he retreated, he would look weak. If he ignored the threat, the Lighthouse broadcast would destroy the Concorde's legitimacy forever. The humans had not just fought a military war. They had fought a political one, and they had won. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "What we've always wanted," Vasquez replied. "Independence. not just for humanity, but for every species that chooses it. A new galactic order, built on freedom instead of control. You can be part of it, or you can be swept away by it. That's the only choice you have left. Vorath looked at her for a long time. He was old and he had seen many things. He had watched civilizations rise and fall. He had believed, truly believed, that the Concord was different, that the Concord would last forever. Now he saw the truth. Nothing lasts forever, not even empires. I need to consult with the High Council, he said. Of course, Vasquez replied. You have 1 hour. The hour passed, and when the deadline came, the galaxy changed forever. The Lighthouse Protocol activated. 32,000 probes, scattered across thousands of light years, began broadcasting simultaneously. Every species with a receiver heard the truth. The wars of extermination, the forced assimilations. The cultures erased, the histories rewritten, the peoples who had been integrated out of existence. At the same time the rebellion began, the Cathari Reach, the Veldari Consortium, and the Outer Systems Alliance declared their independence, just as Vasquez had promised. But they were not alone. The broadcast had awakened something that had been sleeping for millennia. Within hours, 14 more groups announced their withdrawal from the Concord, and the human fleets emerged from hiding. They struck at the Concord supply lines, just as Vasquez had warned. They did not try to destroy the Second Fleet. They didn't need to. With no supplies, no reinforcements, and a galaxy in revolt, the Second Fleet was stranded. Vorath received the news in silence. His officers looked to him for orders, but he had none to give. The war was over, though the killing would continue for a long time yet. He opened a channel to Vasquez. You planned this from the beginning, he said. Everything. The refusal to join, the first battle, the apparent retreat. You were never trying to defeat us militarily. You were trying to break us politically. Yes, Vasquez admitted. Why? Why go through all of this? The deaths, the destruction, the risk? You could have just released the broadcast from the start. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Because information isn't enough, she said finally. People can know the truth and still not act on it. They need to believe that change is possible. They needed to see someone stand against the Concord and survive. They needed hope. She paused. We gave them hope. The rest they did themselves. Vorath looked at the tactical display, at the markers showing rebel fleets, seceding systems, and supply lines in ruins. The Concord was fracturing before his eyes. What happens now? He asked. Now we rebuild, Vasquez said. Not an empire this time. Something better. Something that lets every species choose their own path. And if some choose to fight, if some try to restore the Concord by force, then we'll fight them too. That's the price of freedom. It has to be defended, but at least the choice will be ours. Vorath nodded slowly. He understood. He had been a warrior for 2,000 years. He knew that some things were worth fighting for. He just wished he had been fighting for them all along. Grand Admiral, Vasquez said, would you like to help us build something new? Vorath considered the question. His whole life had been dedicated to the Concord. He had believed in its mission, its promise of peace through unity. But the unity had been a lie, and the peace had been built on graves. Yes, he said finally, I think I would. It was not surrender. It was something far more significant. It was a beginning. 1 year had passed since the Lighthouse broadcast changed the galaxy. It had been a year of chaos, of violence, and of hope. The Concord had not died quietly. Hardliners among the elder species had refused to accept the rebellion, launching campaigns of repression that killed millions. Some of the newly independent species had turned on each other, old grudges surfacing after millennia of enforced peace. Pirates and warlords had emerged in the power vacuum, preying on the weak. But through it all, something new was being born. Secretary General Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, humanity's newest and largest diplomatic facility. It hung in neutral space at a point equidistant from a dozen major civilizations. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships from 100 different species gathered for the most important moment in galactic history. Today, they would sign the Compact of Free Peoples. It was not a perfect document. Months of negotiation had produced something that made no one completely happy. There were compromises on trade, on territory, on the handling of species that still wanted to remain part of what was left of the Concord. Some issues had been left deliberately vague to be worked out later when tempers had cooled. But it was a start, a real start. "Nervous?" Admiral Chen Wei asked, stepping up beside her. He had aged in the past year, his hair now fully gray, his face lined with the weight of command. But he was still standing, still fighting. They all were. "Terrified," Vasquez admitted. "This is the easy part, getting everyone to sign. The hard part is making it work. We've done harder things." "Have we?" She turned to look at him. "We started a war, James. We burned down a 12,000-year-old empire. We have no idea what we've set in motion." "We set freedom in motion," Chen replied. "Whatever comes next, at least people will get to choose it for themselves." Vasquez nodded slowly. It was the only comfort she had. The future was uncertain, maybe dangerous, definitely difficult, but it would be a future that beings chose for themselves, not one imposed by distant masters who claimed to know better. That had to count for something. The ceremony began an hour later. The Great Hall of Unity Station filled with representatives from over 200 species, the largest diplomatic gathering in recorded history. Some had traveled for months to be here. Some had sent representatives via faster-than-light communication, their holographic images flickering slightly, but their presence no less real. Among them were faces Vasquez had come to know well over the past year. Grand Admiral Vorth, who had become one of the strongest advocates for the New Order. Minister Yiel of the Luminari, who had secretly worked to undermine the Concord for centuries. Representatives from the Cathari Reach, the Veldari Consortium, and dozens of other groups that had broken away in the Great Rebellion. And in the back of the hall, small and ancient, sat Grandmother Teth. She had not spoken since the uprising began. Some said she was dying, her ancient body finally failing after more millennia than anyone could count. Others said she was simply watching, waiting to see what would grow from the seeds of chaos. Vasquez approached the podium. The hall fell silent. "1 year ago," she began, her voice carried by translation systems to every ear in the room, "humanity made a choice. We chose to reject an offer that seemed generous but hit a trap. We chose to fight rather than kneel. We chose to believe that freedom was worth any price." She paused, looking out at the assembled delegates. "Many of you thought we were crazy. Some of you still do. We were one species against an empire that had lasted 12,000 years. We had no right to win. We had no reason to expect anything but destruction." She smiled slightly, "But we weren't really alone, were we? We were the spark, but you were the fuel. Every species in this room has their own story of oppression, their own memories of what the Concord took from them. We didn't start the fire. We just showed that it could burn." She gestured to the document displayed behind her, its text glowing in the soft light. "The Compact of Free Peoples is not a new empire. It is not a replacement for the Concord. It is something different, something that has never been tried on this scale before." She began to read from the preamble. "We, the sovereign peoples of the galaxy, recognizing the inherent dignity and equal rights of all sapient beings, reject the premise that peace requires subjugation. We affirm that true civilization is built not on control, but on cooperation. Not on fear, but on trust. Not on the silence of the conquered, but on the voice of the free. She looked up. Under this compact, every signatory species retains full sovereignty. No one will tell you how many children you can have, or what you can build, or what you can believe. No one will place advisors in your councils or oversight committees in your industries. You will govern yourselves as you should have been governing yourselves all along. In exchange, you agree to only one principle, that you will extend the same courtesy to others. You will not conquer. You will not enslave. You will not erase the cultures of those weaker than you, as was done to so many of us. Freedom is not truly freedom if it is only for the strong. She stepped back from the podium. Some will say this is naive. Some will say that peace requires a strong hand, that freedom leads to chaos, that only an empire can maintain order across so many stars. Maybe they're right. Maybe this experiment will fail. Maybe in 1,000 years, historians will look back at this moment and shake their heads at our foolishness. Her voice hardened. But I would rather fail reaching for something noble than succeed at something shameful. The Concord gave us order, but it was the order of a prison. The order of people who were never allowed to grow, to change, to become what they might have been. We paid for peace with our souls, and I say that price was too high. She looked directly at the delegates. Today we try something new. Today we trust each other, not blindly, not foolishly, but as equals who have chosen to walk the same path. Will we stumble? Certainly. Will we fall? Perhaps, but at least we will be walking on our own feet toward a destination we chose ourselves. She raised her hand. For the United Nations of Earth and all human territories, I sign the Compact of Free Peoples. She pressed her palm to the display, and her signature appeared on the document. One by one, the other representatives came forward. Some walked with pride, signing their names with flourishes. Others moved slowly, still uncertain, committing themselves to something they weren't sure they believed in. A few wept, overcome by the moment. When Vorath came forward, there was a murmur in the hall. Many still distrusted him. He had spent 2,000 years enforcing the Concord's will. His name was associated with some of the worst moments of the old order, but he signed anyway. I spent my life serving what I thought was peace, he said, his voice rough. I was wrong. This is peace. This right here. People choosing to live together instead of being forced. He looked at Vasquez. I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did, but I'm going to try. The signing continued for hours. By the end, 214 species had added their names to the compact. Not everyone by far. The hardline Concord remnants had refused to attend. Several species had declined to sign, preferring to wait and see. Others had simply not been invited, their governments too unstable or their intentions too unclear. But it was enough. It was a beginning. As the last delegate stepped away from the display, Vasquez felt a presence beside her. She turned to find Grandmother Teth, the ancient Kithari, looking up at her with those 4 ageless eyes. You did well, young one, the old being said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried through the hall. Did I? Vasquez asked. I started a war. Millions died. Maybe billions before it's over. Millions have always died, Grandmother Teth replied. The question is whether their deaths lead somewhere, whether they mean something. She gestured at the hall, at the delegates who were now mingling, talking, beginning the long work of building something new. This is what their deaths bought, the chance for something better. That is more than most deaths achieve. She reached up and touched Vasquez's hand. Her skin was papery and cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. I have lived for a very long time, she said. I watched the Concord rise. I watched it become something ugly. I waited for someone to challenge it, and no one did. Until you. I was just in the right place at the right time. Perhaps, or perhaps you were exactly what the galaxy needed, exactly when it needed it. Either way, you have my gratitude. She smiled, the expression strange on her ancient face. And now I think I can finally rest. She turned and walked away, her small form disappearing into the crowd. Vasquez never saw her again. 3 weeks later, word came that Grandmother Teth had died peacefully on her homeworld, the last of her kind. Her 4 eyes finally closed. But the story didn't end there. Stories never really end. They just become new stories. 5 years later, the galaxy looked very different. The compact of free peoples had grown to include over 300 species. Trade routes that had been closed for millennia were open again. Scientists from dozens of civilizations worked together on projects that no single species could have attempted alone. There were disputes, of course, and conflicts, and once a small war that had to be talked down before it spread. But for the most part, the compact held. The hardline Concord remnants had shrunk to a handful of systems, isolated and bitter, refusing to accept that their time had passed. They would cause trouble for generations, Vasquez knew. Old empires never died cleanly, but their threat grew smaller every year. Humanity had changed too. No longer a single planet, not even a single region of space, but a sprawling diaspora scattered across hundreds of systems. Humans had discovered something about themselves in the crucible of war. They liked exploring. They liked building. They liked finding new places and new peoples and figuring out how to live together. They were still violent sometimes, still prone to conflict and stubbornness, and all the old flaws that had plagued them since they came down from the trees. But they were also kind and curious and determined to do better. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. Elena Vasquez stood on a balcony on Earth, looking up at the night sky. She was old now, her hair white, her face deeply lined. She had stepped down as Secretary General years ago, leaving the work to younger hands. Now she was just a retired woman who gave occasional speeches and wrote memoirs that not many people read. But sometimes on nights like this, she would look up at the stars and remember. She remembered the fear she had felt, saying no to the Concorde. She remembered the weight of 1,800 names after the Battle of Kepler 138. She remembered the desperation of the evacuation, the relief of the rebellion, the strange mixture of triumph and grief when the lighthouse broadcast changed everything. She remembered all the people who had died to make this moment possible, the crews who had bought time with their lives, the colonists who had left everything they knew to hide in the dark, the soldiers who had fought battles they knew they couldn't win just to give others a chance to run. She remembered, and she tried to be worthy of their sacrifice. A young woman appeared on the balcony, Commander Sarah Chen, Admiral Chen's daughter, who had carried humanity's invitation to negotiate all those years ago. She was a captain now, commanding her own ship, still young enough to believe that anything was possible. "Secretary General," she said, "I'm sorry to disturb you." "Just Elena now," Vasquez corrected gently. "What is it?" "We received a message from the Outer Rim. A new species has been discovered. They're about 500 years from faster-than-light travel, but they've started detecting our signals. They want to know—" She hesitated. "They want to know if we're coming to conquer them." Vasquez smiled. It was a sad smile, but also proud. "Tell them the truth," she said. "Tell them we're coming to say hello. Tell them they're free to make their own choices, build their own future, be whatever they want to be. And tell them that if they ever need help, all they have to do is ask." She looked back up at the stars. "Tell them that's what neighbors do." The young captain nodded and left. Vasquez remained on the balcony, watching the lights in the sky. Somewhere out there, a species she would never meet was learning that they were not alone in the universe. They were probably afraid. They were probably wondering what it meant, whether the powers that lurked among the stars would crush them or leave them in peace. She wished she could tell them that the universe was kinder than they feared, that the darkness between the stars was not as cold as it looked, that there were people out there who remembered what it was like to be young and small and scared, and who had vowed never to forget. But they would learn that for themselves, in time. For now, it was enough to stand under the stars and know that the galaxy was changing, that freedom was spreading, one system at a time, that the dream of a universe where all peoples could live as equals was slowly, painfully, imperfectly becoming real. It was not the end of the story, but it was a good place to pause. And in the quiet of the night, Elena Vasquez allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace, not the peace of the Concord, built on silence and submission. Real peace, the peace of a job well done, a promise kept, a debt paid. The peace of someone who had changed the universe and could finally rest. Above her, the stars kept shining, and across 1,000 worlds in 100 languages, on countless lips, people spoke the words that had become a greeting, a prayer, and a promise all at once. Freedom is worth fighting for, always.